Anne is telling me she's only seeing part of my face here. I'm like the guy in Home Improvement that you only see his eyes above the fence. There you go. Continue, Juliet.
Yeah. So I will put a link in the chat to our YouTube page and our event calendar. You can also subscribe to our newsletter on our website and just get all these updates straight to your inbox.
Yeah, great. And so all good. So let's get started. So I'm very pleased to introduce Cornelia Walther. And Cornelia, I discovered you on Forbes magazine with an article on prosocial AI, and of course that got my attention. And so I started reading your work and loved it. Very convergent with our form of prosociality, and quite a bit of independence convergence, as we will see. So you arrived at this place of prosocial AI by your own path, and so that's why I organized this podcast, and we even met in person at the Human Energy event just last week, I believe it was, organized by our partner organization, Human Energy. And I'm betting that, well, Alan here is a member of that group, and I suspect that others are as well. So welcome in the first place.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And let's begin by just having you introduce yourself in your own words and the path that did lead you to prosocial AI. You have a very interesting background, and maybe I could just ask you to introduce yourself at appropriate length and your path to focusing on prosocial AI and how you define that concept.
Sure. But thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Cornelia Walther. I've been working with UNICEF for 20 years in humanitarian operations, mostly West Africa, but also Afghanistan and Haiti. Then worked with UNICEF in headquarters, developed their global communication strategy, and then decided it's time for radical change, left and started to refine and write down POSI, a paradigm for social change via individual transformation, that I had prototyped whilst working in Haiti, and which looks at individual existence as a composition of twice four dimensions with aspirations, emotions, thoughts, and sensations at the individual level, and individuals as part of communities, countries, and the planet at the collective level. And if we really want to bring about sustainable social change, then we need to not only look at each of these dimensions, but start to recognize and systematically influence their interplays. Wrote a first book about that, which was published, and then another one. And starting in 2021, I became more interested in the potential of technology for positive social change at scale. Wrote a book about aspirational algorithms before ChatGPT became the name of every game. And what seemed utopian at the time, you put it in the context of ChatGPT, it's actually not so far off. And then wrote another one about inspiring leadership. And I'm now, since 2023, a fellow at, on the one hand, the Wharton Initiative for Neuroscience, on the other hand, the School of Dental Medicine, and starting next month, also at the McNulty Leadership Center at Wharton. And my PhD was in law, so I'm kind of atypical. And prosocial AI, to answer also the second part of your question, relates to AI systems that are deliberately tailor-trained, tested, and targeted to bring out the best in and for people and planet, which is, in a way, a significant shift from the classic approach to technology in general and AI in particular, because the first, second, and third industrial revolution were driven by commercial interests. And I think with AI, the impact of the human mind, of our ways of thinking, feeling, and interacting are just too far reaching to leave it at that. So that was a long answer.
No, it was great. And so in your writing, you talk about artificial intelligence, natural intelligence, and hybrid intelligence. Maybe you could unpack some of those terms
Yeah.
for us.
So hybrid intelligence, in my sense, arises from the symbiosis of natural intelligence, which is a holistic understanding of self and society, and which kind of arises from an understanding of these 4x4 dimensions that I mentioned before, with aspirations, emotions, thoughts, and sensations at the individual level, but also our place in communities as part of countries and as sharing the same planet. So that's for me what is encapsulated in NI, natural intelligence. And then the second component of hybrid intelligence is this AI piece. And I would argue that we need to go beyond just digital literacy and prompt engineering to understanding how it works, why, and what are the caveats and limitations. Because only if we have a real understanding of both the NI and the AI, we can bring out the best and their complementarity.
So let's have some examples of prosocial AI and some counterexamples of when AI actually leads in non-prosocial dimensions. And an observation that I have when I consider this is that although AI is new in many respects, there's other respects in which it's not new, where agents are still interacting socially with each other. And so for the same reason that human social interactions can go in a prosocial direction or not, then hybrid interactions can go in a prosocial direction or not. And that or not conditions is more or less the same. And I think that's actually a comfort that it's really what we need to regulate all of our behaviors, no matter how they're assisted. There's something very general we can say about that. And so we're not on completely new ground when it comes to regulating AI. So first of all, do you broadly agree with that statement? And then we can proceed to cases where AI leads to wonderful prosocial outcomes and then the dark side.
I 100% agree. And I think you're also pointing to a really important aspect, which is the fact that AI is neutral. It's a mean to an end. And I think something that tends to fall between the cracks in the current AI hype is that there are traditionally two camps, one which is very excited about the efficiency and effectiveness, and the other one which sees the doom and gloom of AI for humankind. But ultimately, we can't expect the technology of tomorrow to be better than the humans of today.
I was
So
just
there's
about to
still
quote that. I literally I had that written down in my notebook and I was about to quote it. So you beat me to the punch.
apologies. Because I think there is still this old saying of garbage in, garbage out, and that holds very true. But the important aspect, and maybe also the more empowering aspect, is that we have a choice in that regard. So we can shift the garbage in, garbage out to values in, values out. But again, that depends on the humans of today and the choices that we make.
Yeah, you have an example in one of your articles on it seems like a mundane example of a radiology department on basically AI scoring of X-rays to detect lung cancer, and as something which actually did work well in some cases, but not in others. So there's a model case there of something which has a very limited but important pro-social application. But even that presented difficulties. So maybe you could cover that case and then some other examples of
Yeah.
to make the conversation concrete.
So I think the radiology example that you pointed out is a really good one in various ways, because it also, it shows the potential complementarity between NI and AI, but it also points to the very important aspect of deliberately investing in our HI, so our hybrid intelligence, and the acute awareness of the limitations of AI, which goes directly against the human nature of cognitive, the path of least resistance, and our inclination towards laziness and to delegating efforts. And I think the cognitive offloading aspect is a really big risk in our current enarmament with AI. And I would argue we are navigating a very dangerous transition from experimenting with AI towards integrating AI, towards relying on AI, and to full-blown addiction. Because all of us here in this call, we had the luxury of growing up in a time and age where there was not ChatGPT on our fingertips. And I think most of us still were growing up without cell phones in our pockets. So I don't know about you, but I still remember the phone number, for example, of my grandmother when I was growing up and when I was 6. Today, the one phone number that I remember is my own. So I think there is a very dangerous transitioning happening. And I recently spoke to a young woman, and she's not even used to writing her own emails anymore because ChatGPT is now taking over on that. So it's a question of getting used to artificial crutches that we're embracing maybe all too willingly. And like coming back to the radiology example that you gave, that brings out the best added value only if you have a human doctor who A, has the capacity to discover mistakes, but also the alertness of checking the results and pointing out the errors that might have been made. And the more we're getting used, and there's
So Cornelia, the example is that basically this was tested in one hospital, as I understand it, and then it was implemented in like 13 hospitals, and that the outcome in those 13 hospitals was not as good as in the one hospital where it was tested. And then people investigated why was it that it didn't work in some cases. So if you could elaborate on that a little bit as to why it failed to work.
It failed to work because it wasn't supervised properly. And if you just let AI to its own devices, then it can go well in some cases, and it can go terribly badly in other cases. So it's not as simple as either it's NI or it's AI, but we need to get better at deliberately curating their interplays.
Right. So what are some other examples like that? Let's have some positive examples and some, let's begin with some positive examples. What are some good examples of prosocial AI?
I think some very nice examples are, but they have just as big a downside, is the use of AI chatbots in therapeutic in therapeutic contexts, where it was found that it can, under certain circumstances, really be useful in psychotherapy because people feel more comfortable to interact with a chatbot than they would feel with a human therapist, just because they feel less judged, they feel safer, but also because they have that chatbot at their fingertips 24/7, which is not the case with a psychotherapist. But I'm giving this example with the comma but, because it's, yeah, there is this huge risk of addiction to it, but also because human interaction cannot be replaced by interaction with a bot, even if it's always available. And linking this to a project that I'm currently working on, and it is the C4, the Compassionate Caregiver Companion Coach, which we'll actually start testing this week, and which aims to support caregivers of individuals with disability with quality advice and with also caring for the caregiver tips 24/7, but which is very deliberately configured as a tool, as a support, but not as a replacement. So again, we need to move beyond it's either the human or the machine.
Right. So, any more examples? I just want to ground this in concreteness, and let's have an example of where AI is clearly having pernicious um, consequences and why that might be.
Sorry, negative or positive?
Either one, your choice. Let's have another positive and then have a negative.
Well, I think one very positive is Canigo, which is like the tutor in the pocket that maybe some of you might be familiar with, and which allows to really fine-tune tailor-made education resources for anyone with access to internet and a phone. And that is free as a resource and allows anyone to learn anywhere with tailor-made support. And I think that is fantastic in terms of making quality educational resources available for free to everyone. So that is amazing.
Yeah, and I'll nominate one myself, one that I encountered a couple of months ago called the Upright Project. It's a startup in Finland, and what it claims to be able to do is to measure the positive and negative externalities of any company without relying on their internal data. And so it's like instant transparency that you could measure the impact. It seems like almost too good to be true.
And how do
Um,
you call it?
what the Upright Project? And so just imagine that this is possible, basically, that you could measure the positive and negative externalities of any company without relying on their internal data, and then what you would do with that, what you would be able to do with that information in collaboration with the companies, rewarding the positive externalities, somehow taxing or otherwise inhibiting the negative externalities. So there's another amazing application of AI if it's possible at all.
It sounds very ambitious, but it sounds fantastic. I'll
Yeah.
have to check it out. I did not hear about it.
So what are some clearly pathological uh, examples of AI?
I mean, something as close as Amazon, for example, something as the way in which AI is more and more used to manipulate shopping behaviors, and how our chatbots or our artificial platforms are becoming ever more attuned to our desires before they have even formed in our conscious mind, and how, for example, shopping aspects are positioned in a way to make people buy things that they don't need. So that is not necessarily something new. It has been around for a long time. But I think putting this in the context of extremely advanced AI is very, very dangerous because it's catching the consumer off guard.
Yeah. I mean, this is like a good example of how it exacerbates a problem that already exists. So if we were worried about materialism before, and now we can worry about it even more. So it's not new in kind, but it's new in terms of its effectiveness and so on. Yeah.
And it's also like the perfect illustration of what's the opposite of prosocial AI, but commercial AI.
Yeah, right. And so this is, I mean, all of this comes down to the need for regulation. And so let's talk about that. Uh, what what form does regulation take? And I mean, there's powerful voices that are arguing against no regulation whatsoever. So talk a little bit about the regulatory environment that exists currently, that is being implemented more in Europe than in America. What's the whole regulatory environment? Speak on that topic.
So I think there are many ways of answering that. And the best way would maybe to say it's disorganized and it's chaotic. And depending on the region you look at, there's a different approach that is being taken. But maybe the most opposed options are Europe on the one hand, which clearly puts the consumer front and center. And then on the other hand, there's the US laissez-faire, and which is basically hands off from any kind of regulatory approach. So it's free rein to private sectors. And maybe the answer lies somewhere in between. ASEAN countries have taken more nuanced approach, maybe in that sense. But the challenge might also be that there is not one answer, and a top-down approach is not going to work just because AI, in difference to other technologies, is something where open source models can nowadays be run on every computer. And again, and quoting a colleague of mine, Ethan Mollick, that some of you might have read about, we are now using the worst AI that we'll ever have. So these models are becoming ever more powerful. And when anyone in their basement can run AI, so yeah, I think the traditional and the classic governance approach is not gonna be enough. That's why I think we need to think and rethink about accountability at the micro, meso, macro, and meta level, where just everybody holds a piece of the equation, and where just
Yeah.
every single consumer is part of the big accountability framework.
Yeah, and let me take a little turn here, because in one of your articles you make this distinction of micro, meso, macro, and meta, everything from the very small scale up to the global scale. And of course, some people on this call will recognize that as something that's very close to multi-level selection. And I asked you, as we explore our, how we converged on the same topic, how familiar you are with Eleanor Ostrom and everything that she represents. And you told me, no, not too much, actually. So isn't that interesting? That's one point. It doesn't surprise me in the least. But I think, just to provide a capsule for everyone, first of all, the idea of the commons, basically, and the idea that of a commons, some kind of common pool resource that everyone draws upon and that can be polluted and can be overexploited. That idea, of course, is tremendously relevant to everything AI, because so much of this is a commons situation. And then how to avoid the various tragedies of the commons, and the fact that actually groups are capable of self-regulating. Back to regulation and back to self-regulation. This is something which can happen, does happen, many examples, but it requires certain core design principles. And so the idea that there's core design principles needed for self-regulation is a big part of this. And then finally, the concept of polycentric governance, which notes in the first place that life consists of many spheres of activity. Each sphere has an optimal scale, and good governance requires finding the right scale for each sphere and coordinating among the spheres. So there's a whole package, with apologies for dashing through it so fast, I think, which does provide a framework before we get to AI for regulation, self-regulation at multiple scales. And so therefore, that whole package is available for AI, because we've already said that AI is not different in kind than other forms of social interaction. So I think that's part of the common ground that I look forward to continuing to explore. And it does raise the hope for some concept of regulation which just isn't heavy top down, because, as you say, that's probably not going to happen. So it can't be no regulation. That won't work well. It can't be heavy top-down regulation, because that won't work well. Never has, never will. And so please, let's take this Ostromian framework and make it known to the AI community, and then of course implemented. So, and it's there we could go back to the Upright project and show that provides a vital piece, because one of the core design principles has to do with transparency, monitoring. We have to know what's going on in order to monitor it. So anyhow, there's a brief piece on the commons and the Ostromian framework. Any thoughts you have on that?
No, I mean I think we're using different words to say exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
That AI accountability is a multidimensional challenge, and there is not one clear answer. And it's in a way an interesting illustration of the fact that society is this multidimensional, organically evolving kaleidoscope where it is hard to pin down one responsibility to one component in this overall evolving game set, because we all are responsible. And there are causes and consequences of everything that one player does in this interconnected world. And in that sense, I think AI is a fascinating invitation to maybe seize this opportunity and take a step back and face our own humanity and look at some of the white elephants that we have shooed underneath the table because they were uncomfortable to look at, but also that were easier to not address confrontedly if we could consider that, well, the border ends here and what's happening over there is not my problem. But actually, AI makes it very, very much into our face how interconnected we are.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think very shortly we're going to pass to questions, because I know that our audience has lots and lots of questions. So we're going to let them direct the rest of the conversation. But you have been writing on some current events, and in particular, a recent statement by the new Pope. And also you have a piece on Juneteenth. And I just wondered if you could maybe summarize those two essays that you've written, which relate this to, the very, very current events, including uh, uh, something like Juneteenth.
Yeah, I think that Juneteenth, for me, the point of departure was to look at the aspect of freedom, because there's external freedom and there's internal freedom. And when we look at AI, then it can put us in slavery both externally, and that's was maybe the entry point for that piece, which looked at the fact that we're now chained into this gigantic machine where we're providing human data into big commercial plantations, but also internally, and that's coming back to the shopping example I gave before, where we're navigating this subtle line of enslaving, even if it's our own clicks and choices that we make, but that then maybe opens up a bigger philosophical question of what is freedom if you don't know that you are manipulated? So where do we draw the line between free will, free choices, if your subconscious is influenced? And coming back to the Pope, I think the interesting piece is that he might be an ally in actually making the church a proponent and a champion of prosocial AI. Who knows? Because clearly he is thinking about these aspects.
And then what was the nature of his statement? Basically emphasizing human dignity and so on, but maybe you could just summarize what his statement was.
Well, that human dignity and that the role of the human being should always be front and central. But if we go further and beyond, then it's interesting to think about AI in the context of the church, and that there are more and more examples of people looking for a return to faith and for a return to spirituality, And that is an interesting trend to be followed. But it's also, I think, a dangerous territory if we put that in the context of anthropomorphism, and where people are seeing AI as this magic holy grail, which is becoming a spirit in and by itself. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of questions, and so I think let's spend the rest of our hour with and raise your virtual hands to form a queue. And then Juliet, maybe you could help review the chats. Just so if you've written something in chat, then please speak it. And then we'll go to the hour, and then I think we're available for another half hour, which we typically like to do. So we realize that some people will need to leave on the hour, but for those who don't, then we're going to hang out for another 30 minutes after that. So let's have some questions from our very distinguished and diverse audience. It is inconceivable that there are no questions.
We left you speechless.
Here we go. Shayamal?
Jamal, hi, David. What an excellent session.
Thank you.
I'm from Boston, and I put my comment for discussion actually in the chat. Essentially, I feel talking about prosociality of AI, that AI is, as Cornelia mentioned earlier, is a tool. It's a digital technical tool, and it is designed by humans. And so the prosociality of AI, or any AI tool, would be as prosocial as the humans who designed it at the very basis of it. Now, we do know that AI tends to evolve and so on. It learns and it, but that is the fundamental truth about AI. And so natural intelligence, as again Cornelia mentioned earlier, or implied, will prevail. She mentioned, I think, that today's natural intelligence, and I'm paraphrasing, would prevail over tomorrow's or future versions of AI. And there may be disagreements about it, but as we would see, that is, and all the human values and aspects, and that is going to remain the soul of what we create or create wrongfully, without meaning to create it wrongfully, but that is what could happen. And governance and regulation in some parts of the world is going to be very difficult. Europe is far ahead of, let's say, the United States. And they had the GDPR framework to then take on from there. There's just so much happening in the EU and Europe in general. A human hand needs to guide how AI evolves as prosocial or not. That's my fundamental that I wanted to bring up.
Thank you. Cornelia, would you like to comment on that? I think we're in broad agreement, but would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I don't think there is much to be added, but maybe one thing where I would caution is about this aspect of NI will prevail. I think that requires our very conscious effort to be invested in that, because we shouldn't take it for granted. And I think it's important that we deliberately curate that very precious resource of ours. And that requires a change in some of the education curricula in most countries, with a stronger focus on a holistic understanding of self and society, but also on decision making, on critical thinking, and on the biases that are part of the human mind.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to add that part of being a prosocial agent, whether it's a human agent or an AI agent, is to be responsible for your externalities. It's not enough to be just prosocial within yourself or within your group, but you have to know that you're as a group, then there will be consequences of your actions, and that there's no invisible hand to save the day. The invisible hand metaphor is profoundly wrong. It's wrong for economics and it's wrong for AI. And so whatever you're doing, you need to chart the externalities and then you need to take responsibility for them. That's part of what it means to be a pro-social agent. And there, I think that kind of responsibility is what allows self-regulation to take place. And if it doesn't exist, then you're frankly not a pro-social agent, or you might be a pro-social agent as far as your own organization is concerned, but you're not as far as your organization in relation to other organizations. So true prosociality has to extend outward in addition to inward, and that's the attitude to cultivate. If that could be the norm, then I think then that would be a giant step towards pro-social AI. Freddie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for this session. It's really very, very, very interesting. I'm interested about the kind of practicalities. In order for cooperation to take place between humans, we need the right context in which we can all win together, and that sets the circumstances under which we cooperate. So I'm kind of interested in what are the specific circumstances that we need to set for AI to cooperate with us and to become pro-social. So I wonder if you have any kind of specific ideas or structures. And to a certain extent, we talk about regulation, but I think it's more than that. I think it's more of a larger kind of system that within which we can set up AI systems and humans. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about what those might look like in order to set the conditions for cooperation in a pro-social AI.
I mean, you're opening obviously the Pandora's box of one question that is many questions. So I'm going to be fragmentic in my answers because there is not one answer, and I certainly have only a little piece of the questions at stake. But I think coming back to this four-dimensional logic that I mentioned before with the micro, meso, macro, and meta, I think it's important that when we think about the framework in which prosocial AI can take place, we need to, for everything and systematically reconfigure our way of thinking in a way of always thinking about causes and consequences, which is not how regulations, design, etc., is usually approached, where we have more like an A versus B approach. And I think now we need to adopt a 360-degree angle to it. So that's number one. The other one, which is much more simplistic, which is the aspect of garbage in, garbage out, and which is the kind of data that's going into our algorithms. So one piece of my answer is systemic. The other one is very practical. What kind of data goes in? Because if the data is very limited and very biased, then we can't expect the algorithm to be very extensive and very all-inclusive.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Simai.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a very interesting discussion going on. My question is very basic and simple one. And I want to understand, and that I have been asking this question with many other people as well, that human society has evolved, and the basic element of evolution of human society has been interaction of human beings with human beings. And that is how. Now, I think that when human beings will start interacting more with machines and less with human beings, how will their behavior shape and how they will be more understanding to other human beings, because people have to live in society. So what would be how do you see that?
I don't want to sound too negative, but I think there is a big risk when it comes to AI in the context of interpersonal relationships. Because think about, I don't know how often you use ChatGPT, but it is very sycophantic, and most human beings are not big fans of critical feedback. So now take that aspect, the fact that you have a counterpart that is 24/7 available, always gives you friendly, patient answers that are increasingly fine-tuned to your style of voice, to your style of language, so that gives you exactly what you want when you want it in the formulations that you like. Now, we take that a couple of years into the future when you have embodied AI, because robots are also moving forward. So it's not so utopian or so dystopian, rather, to think about a near future where you have robots that look the way we want, talk the way we want, are always available, are always friendly, patient. I mean, why would you interact with somebody else who is just as quirky and cumbersome as you are yourself? So I mean, obviously this is not going to happen, but this might be an extreme case, and there might be gray options in between the human to human and the human versus robot. But we are navigating right now a transition which we should be very careful about, considering that humans like to walk the path of least resistance, and that also applies in interpersonal relationships.
Allow
Yeah.
me, if you allow me, please. Can I have just one more thing?
Of course,
Because
of course.
I find in young people, they are not as patient as, people of our generation. Their listening capability, the younger people I'm talking who are always on either on mobile or chat GPT or some other kind of a communication that are going on. So I do not find them very patient. I teach students, I know that how their ability, they would put shutters on their mind, and their listening capacities are not as their focus, their listening capacities. And I'm talking about this generation, and I'm talking about the generation that's going to be there in another 20, 30, 40 years. So that was my thank you.
Yeah. Dan. Dan, you there? Kathleen, we can, so here it comes Dan. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. Yeah, thank you. This has been an incredible meeting and conversation. I'm learning a lot. I really appreciate it. I also appreciated your comments on externalities and responsibility and self-regulation. And I posted a question in the chat about I'm really curious, how can prosocial AI, or really any AI, aid environmental sustainability, given that, as far as I've learned about it, the technology is completely unsustainable and very consumptive and polluting?
I think there are, again, no easy answers, because the tool that might come up with very innovative solutions towards climate change and environmental pollution is also the one that is right now driving part of these challenges. So it's in a way the medicine that's supposed to cure us might kill us in the meantime. Because also, and I'm glad that you bring up the aspect of the environmental footprint, because one element is the energy consumption that's coming with our interaction with these tools, and where more and more people, instead of doing a simple Google search, they now ask ChatGPT, which is vastly more energy consuming. But there's also the secondary environmental impact with these huge data centers being built primarily in areas that do not necessarily benefit from it, which is land use, but it's also water use. It's also cooling energy. So it's not just the direct energy aspect, but also the medium and the longer term. So yeah, I don't have a very conclusive answer to that, I'm afraid.
Kathleen, on that cheery note, we passed to Kathleen.
Well, I'd like to go back to the comment that you made, Cornelia, and I'm really impressed with the depth that your thinking goes into. I don't know a lot about AI, but I'm a former therapist and I know a little bit about neurobiology. And you mentioned robots being embodied, and I had a bit of a reaction because I don't consider putting a computer in a mechanism, a physical mechanism, plastic, metal, whatever, so it looks like a human being. I think that interpersonal processes like attunement, when people share an eye gaze, and that eye gaze then releases a flood of neurotransmitters that create empathy, that, oxytocin is part of what creates that bond between mothers and babies. There's another element of self-regulation that combines with cognition and awareness to create that sense of it's not all about me, or what is in the best interest of the whole. And I don't know enough about AI to know, is it in any way capable of that capacity to experience anything like empathy or recognition of the needs of the others, especially to get to that point where it might sacrifice its own needs to, uphold the good of the whole, which is part of my understanding of prosociality. So does it or not?
I think you're raising an important point, and maybe just to be clear about what I said, my point was not about the AI experiencing any kind of feeling, including empathy. My point was only about what does it trigger in the human that interacts with the AI. Because I agree with you, I don't think that AI is experiencing emotions, and even if it's going to find an embodied form, I still think that it won't. But that's another discussion. And I mean, there is a lot of debate right now going on about artificial general intelligence, artificial superintelligence, and to which extent you can actually have sentient AI. But I think rather than thinking about that right now, what is important is the fact that human beings are establishing emotional attachment and emotional relationships with AI, including with just a chatbot without even having this embodied aspect. Maybe some of you read about these articles where a woman fell in love with their chatbot. So
I have read about that, and I'm sorry, I don't think I made my point clear. I agree with you. What you're saying about human beings can respond to this this representation of humanity with real emotions, But my question was more about, is there capacity within AI to experience what we experience through being embodied, through our capacity to have that. It's almost a field effect where we are recognizing the other, and we're recognizing our place in the whole, and we're self-regulating. I think what you're saying is AI can only be self-regulating to the extent that it's prosocial, if it's programmed to do that. It doesn't have a underlying biological, neurological sentience that would allow that to do it. And I think of that as part of the evolution of consciousness, that it's embodied and that evolved life forms have capacity to recognize the needs of the whole and to sacrifice themselves if necessary for the needs of the whole.
Well, insofar as everything human has a mechanistic basis, and I think that in principle we could say that that could be, in principle, possible to recreate in an artificial intelligence. But let's proceed to Tanuja.
Yeah. Thank you, Cornelia, very much. So I studied AI. I'm in electrical engineering, and artificial intelligence was part of my coursework. And the basis of the generation comes from what's called neural networks. So it is a physical copying of how the neural synapses work in our brain, right? So it's a copying of that. But we now know that human intelligence is at all levels. It's not just in the brain. So it's not just the mechanics of it that create intelligence. So mechanics is just one way, right? So the CPU, just like a CPU in a computer, doesn't contain intelligence. It processes it. And that's what AI as well does. So that wasn't my point, though. By the way, the technology sector's response to the high energy needs is to support nuclear plants, nuclear energy. So Bill Gates has bought a nuclear plant, by the way. And I believe Facebook is doing the same. So my point about humans and my belief is that humans should coexist with what they create. But at the time of creation, we know the known unknowns. We don't know the unknown unknowns, but we do know the known unknowns, and we should make those clear. But because of a profit motive, we don't. We hide the known unknowns. For example, Apple has just produced a paper a week ago proving that AI does not think. Yeah? MIT created a paper a month ago proving again, not the first time, but again, that that we don't know how AI works. Us humans who have created it don't know how it works. Yeah. And so the last point, I will use the guidance from the great teacher, the CIA, to say that CIA has recognized that the strongest truth serum in the world is silence. So when humans are put into silence alone with themselves for a certain period of time, they come to an understanding of truth, their own truth, if you will. But what we are eliminating is silence itself through distraction. So now we're creating a context where individual paths to truth has been is weaker now because we have limited our access to silence itself. That's it.
I mean, I love your points. So thank you for that. And having done various Vipassana meditation retreats that maybe some of you have heard about, so where you are 10 days in complete silence, I entirely agree with your teacher. However, I would argue that humans for a long time and long before the onset of ChatGPT have been extremely good in distracting themselves because they don't like to spend time in silence with their own thinking. So I don't think we need a ChatGPT for that. The other aspect, and you pointed to that we don't understand AI and that we don't understand how it works or why it does what it does. Yes. And what is fascinating to me is that we keep on making it more sophisticated without understanding it in the meantime. And that's also coming back to another clash of logic, like this moratorium that was put out last year, where all the big technology players were calling for a moratorium. Let's stop investing in AI until we understand it better. And they were all signing, publishing, and at the same time pouring billions into making it more powerful. So there's this wash me but don't use water. Everybody else stop, I will keep doing. So yeah, I think it's an important illustration of the fact that we are very, very incoherent, and that might become very dangerous in the context of AI.
If we can
Camille,
recognize that it's the profit motive.
yeah, and the profit motive is always a lower level motive that's going to have higher level externalities, negative externalities. Camille, did you want to make on that point?
Yeah,
And
thank you.
then Tony.
Oh, okay, sorry, Tony was there before me. I just can't raise my hand for some reason in the thing. Quickly, I'm just thinking, well, first of all, I think of AI as the new Gollum, and we kind of put our faith into it the same way, and it has no real language, it has no thought, no soul, and we're putting a lot of faith into it. So, but when I think about it, when I heard about your presentation, I thought, okay, well, how do we make this pro-social? And I'm thinking about context. And I look at the Sam Altman, they went from a non-profit to now a profit, and what's happening now with Iran. And it's like, do people, I mean, are we the only ones aware of the Earth's holding capacity? I mean, there's some things that seem so obvious to us, right? So I'm thinking, is it a question of bringing context in better stimulus control? Do we need better data about our impact, those externalities? I mean, what does it take to when you have a person like Sam Altman that's in that position, and he's in power now, right? He's grown fast and he's too big to fail practically now. And some of these people, it's not their problem. They have enough money that it's not their problem if the rest of the world suffers. So I don't know, is it a question of better context from better data, from better externalities analysis?
So again, I think there are different ways of looking at that, and depending on the context aspect might be the issue, that there is not enough putting into perspective. But when it comes to Sam Altman, I think he sincerely believes that AI and super powerful AI will be something that's good for humanity. I mean, he has children, and he thinks, he was quoted recently that he thinks his children will look back on humanity and will have pity with us who had to grow up in such a terrible world without fantastic, super intelligent AI to help us. So I don't think that he lacks context, but more a mindset to make sense of that context.
Well, this illustrates how, intentions, it's based on the consequences of our actions, not our intentions. We can be extremely well-meaning. We can believe to the depths of our soul that this is going to be good for humanity, but then it could be not the case. I think this is also true for laissez-faire economics. They're not greedy people necessarily. They actually think that this is the best way for economies to run, but it just turns out it's not so. So intentions are the relationship between intentions and actions is very, very complex. But Tony, let's proceed to you.
Yes, David, you just given me the opening I was trying to think about. And Cornelia and everybody here, I want to thank you all for sharing this time and wisdom. This is a wonderful event. So I come from the 40 years on the factory floor of a General Motors parts enterprise. And I have witnessed collective consciousness in terms of baby steps of solidarity, baby steps of creating this third entity, not the individual, but this collective entity where workers come together to, in a sense, the prisoners take over the prison. And this idea of that humans are social animals. And I wonder if you could talk about, you mentioned very early in your talk, this entity or this aspect of socialization and AI, and what would happen, or how do we manage, how can we use our language and our nouns and verbs to put value in and value out collectively? And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you for raising that. I think it starts individually, and it starts with becoming very clear about what are our values and what are our feelings and how do we think about that. So that is, in a way, a lot of the challenges that are falling into our laps with AI are non-technological and are very individual, and they confront us with maybe what I would call the big macro questions. Why am I here? Who am I as a human being? Where do I stand in life? And what do I do in order to align my aspirations and my actions? So in a way, the very basic A to Z that, in my sense, should be spoken about starting in kindergarten. Because then once you have this anchored mindset, you have a different way of interacting with others, but also with AI.
Yeah, let me chip in here, Tony. And I want to learn more about the worker groups that you described, and prosocial is very much about organizing small purpose-oriented groups, basically small groups of people. Not they don't have to be small, but that are engaged in something that's meaningful to them and are appropriately structured. And the Ostrom core design principles is something that we try to build into that group. That's a lot of evidence showing that's the optimal human social environment. It is very much a human to human relationship. And if that's your goal, to build such groups and then to have those groups interacting with other groups, then AI can be an enormously productive tool. It does not substitute for the human relationships, it augments them. And so, for example, one thing that we do pre-AI is we try to evaluate groups for how well they're implementing the core design principles, and then we try to help those groups do a better job. Well, AI can be an enormously helpful tool for doing that, and so on and so forth. So I think this is another case of, in the first place, forming goals that are pro-social and also contribute to the humanity of it, basically. The goal being to foster relationships among real humans as opposed to substituting for them. And then AI in the service of that goal. So I think it's all coming back to AI as a tool. Any tool can also be used as a weapon. Every tool has unforeseen consequences. How many folktales are there where you get to make a wish and end up regretting your wish? So anyhow, so back to that. Tony, do you have more to say?
Yeah, no, yes, it's just fascinating to me. I believe, I am certain that human development will lead to a collective consciousness. And I'm just wondering, is there going to be, will there be a cacophony of different collective consciousnesses as we evolve, as our capacity to create new realities, and how, it's just, my language is not able to handle this, and I want to learn about it. I know it's necessary to have collaboration, but not just ordinary collaboration, dialogue, as Bohm talks about, that the essence of ethical connections and action is what we're going to need to survive. And I just want to learn more about that.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Here we go. Melissa. Melissa, you might be muted. You are muted. So are you there? We're not hearing you. Vivek, while we're waiting for Melissa, Vivek, would you like to?
Yeah. So many discussions happened so far about externalities from AI infrastructures and solutions like privately owned nuclear energy systems is going to help the AI infrastructures. Are there any discussions about the need for decentralizing the infrastructures across continents instead of one centralized infrastructure? If we are going to centralize the AI data centers and all servers in single location, it is going to demand more energy and water and other resources from that particular location. So is there need to recognize the necessity to decentralize the infrastructure to avoid energy overload in single location?
I think there are discussions about that happening. Ultimately, that is, at least in my sense, as much a question about energy and infrastructure as it is a question of power and including geopolitical and business power, centralization, and who considers to be a key strategic player. And I think this being said, right now, those who are driving the infrastructure investment are very unlikely to let go of whatever piece of the cake they are holding right now.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
May I add to that?
Sure, Tanuja.
Yeah. So there's already cloud-based AI infrastructure. So that is by definition decentralized. However, speed of processing is related to physical distance. So I can imagine Wall Street will not be interested in decentralization because for them, a microsecond makes the difference in automated trading, right? So then they will be co-locating as much as possible, or they'll move the banks to where the data centers are.
Yeah. Yeah. Melissa, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I just wanted to add a couple things that maybe people might know about. Our chips today, like the chips that we use today on our computers, are eventually, well, they are rendered as much slower than chips that are being developed today as we speak. We have like photonic chips that are coming out, and we also have the quantum chips that are getting developed. Yeah, so I guess we also have like graphene chips that are also being developed, and these things are supposed to be a lot more secure than the chips that we have today, and also much more energy efficient. I guess the photonic chips that are being developed take a lot less power to cool them down, and so in terms of like, you know, maybe even putting a data center underwater like what China did and Microsoft did, that's eventually, maybe sooner than we think, is going to be rendered as not even necessary. And so so there's that. And so couple quotes that I'd like to bring up. Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, is said that data is a precious thing and will last longer than the systems themselves. And also the reason why I'm here, David Sloan Wilson, selfishness beats altruism within groups, altruistic groups beats selfish groups, everything else is commentary. James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, states in his book, the work that hurts you less than it hurts others is the work you were made to do. And just combining that with today's concept of decentralization in the realm of Web3 and cryptocurrency. Decentralization is the transfer of control of an activity or organization to several local offices or authorities rather than one single one. And then combining that with the idea of data being something that is literally produced and generated and collected every single second of every single day by the people who can afford to collect it and put it in their data centers, by multi-billion-dollar companies, multi-million-dollar companies that buy them from data brokers, is something that should be, I think, reframed within everybody's mind. Is that when we sign up to use these devices, right? When we purchase these devices, there's a fine print that you are basically signing over your data, and not to cause outrage or to escalate this in this situation, but the concept of truly realizing that this is your data, our data, my data, that I am stating right now. This is essentially everything that gets put on the internet. You sign over and it's free. It's up for grabs.
Okay, thank you. Cornelia, do you want to comment on that?
No, I don't think I have anything to add to that.
Is there a possibility that everything could become less energy expensive and so on and so forth?
Absolutely. And I mean, that's how productivity has always driven the commercial sector. Like, everything started out as extremely expensive and then became less and less. Like, if you think about the cost of the first car and the cars cost today, so it becomes ever more affordable. Or even if you think about the cost of tokens in 2022, when ChatGPT was initially launched, and what it costs today, it is becoming ever less expensive. But I'm not sure if that is the main challenge, nor do I think that this is completely eliminating the bigger question of energy. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me finish up with a conversation on what we can do working together, because Prosocial World definitely wants to become a hub or a hive, as we're starting to use the word hive, being evocative of a beehive with its cooperation for the development of prosocial AI. And so, what's needed to be more effective at promoting prosocial uses of AI, Cornelia, in your opinion? What are the limiting factors, and what could an organization such as Prosocial World or Human Energy, our partner organization, do in service of prosocial AI?
I think a lot of it is part of maybe what you're doing already, which is this aspect of changing minds and creating awareness of the multidimensional interplays, which are now taking place in a hybrid world. So I think in that sense, you are already doing a lot. What might now be interesting, and I'm very happy to collaborate on that, is to put this aspect of the multidimensional interplays and the need for a pro-social intent in the context of an increasingly hybrid world, where it is still the same logic, but it's taking on more urgency and an additional dimension.
Excellent. Well, I think that could be the final word, unless anybody wants to add to it. And I might encourage people just to say a word in checking out. Viveka, I've been hoping that you would raise your hand because you've been making chat comments, but maybe I could actually encourage you just to say a little bit. And also, Anne, you've been writing in the chat, and anyone who's been writing in the chat, it would be nice just to have a little bit to share that. Rebecca, do you have anything that you'd like to?
Yeah, thanks, David. Thank you, Cornelia and David, and everyone here. It's a wonderful topic and so important and relevant and challenging. What's kind of coming up for me a lot is this going back to that, like what motivates behavior and the sort of lowest common denominator of profit-driven behaviors both selfishly and at a group contact level, and how sort of misdirected that is in the long run. After we all have a certain basic our basic shelter needs met and so forth, and yet that's sort of so much this acquisition mindset, right? I mean, we in the Western world are fully colored by that, and so there is how to help us shift and to as a global humanity and how to attract people. How I think Prosocial World is trying to do that in part with how it's organized and what it's putting out in the world. But I guess because as long as those are the sort of motivators that drive behavior, acquisition and I guess power, and when we find our
Hey, sweetie. Sorry,
That's
it was very interesting.
You please mute while Viveka finish up. So keep going, Viveka. Oop, you might be frozen. Oh, that's such a shame. Okay, well, I think that unless Viveka comes back on, and I'm really sorry that that was interrupted, but I guess this is oh, no, okay. All right, everybody. I think maybe this is just fine, and we'll sign out. And thanks to Cornelia, and hopefully this will lead to continuous interactions. Basically, everything Prosocial World does is intended to be a continuous process of cultural evolution. So thank you very much, everybody, and until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.